You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and since I'm traveling for Thanksgiving, which is the best because I love my kids and my grandson, and I'll get to see all of them throughout the week, but that travel means I'm not in my home studio, and I had to record early, so I searched for specific news updates that I could bring you that you might not have heard over the last few weeks. And this first story helps us learn in the true crime world that you never give up. We have to head back to June 9th of 1995 in Arkansas, and the family of Colleen Nick was doing what American families do. They support friends and family, and Colleen decides to take her 6-year-old daughter, Morgan, to watch a Little League baseball game in Alma, Arkansas. Now, it's just a short drive from their hometown of Ozark. Colleen left her other 2 children, 3.5-year-old Logan and 22-month-old Taryn, back home with her mother. It was a warm night, and for most of the game, Morgan played on the bleachers next to her mother. And for part of the time, Morgan was teasing her mother. She would lean down and untie Colleen's shoelaces to her athletic shoes, and when Colleen would notice and retie them, Morgan would giggle and giggle. Now, I want to interject a portion of my life here. In the early 80s, I used to go to the ballpark with my dad all of the time. I was a caboose kid, which meant I tagged along to adult activities frequently. Sometimes my dad would be playing in the fast-pitch softball game. Sometimes he would be umpiring the game, and sometimes we'd just be there watching together. Those 3 scenarios are very different. If my dad was playing, I would sit by myself on the bleachers behind the dugout and watch the game. If my dad was umpiring, I would sit in the bleachers behind home plate and I would watch. I was alone often when those situations would play out. And I was Morgan's age, 6 and 7 years old, just trusting the world was a good place and that I could safely sit on the bleachers without an adult monitoring my actions. It was a different time, you guys. And although in 1995, when Morgan is now at the ballpark and people aren't so trusting, it's not like today. Kids still did free-range activities with regularity back then. And that's what happened next for little Morgan. Her 2 friends kept asking her to go catch fireflies. It's dark by this point, and the 3 could live the best evening together catching those magic flying bugs. Well, finally, Colleen said that Morgan could go with the 2 friends into the nearby field. The 3 would be about 75 yards from Colleen, but there's safety in numbers, right? And besides, the 2 friends, they're older, one being 8 and the other being 10 years old. As the 3 hustled off, Colleen blew Morgan a kiss. After about 15 minutes of the 3 being gone, playing in the field, the game ended, and it was time to gather kids and items and head off to home. As Colleen turned to scan the field to find Morgan, all she could see was the 2 friends coming back from the field. There was no Morgan. And back in the 90s, Colleen told the Blytheville Courier-News that she knew instantly something wasn't right. But you guys, moms just know. As Colleen rushed up to the girls, quizzing them on where Morgan was, they explained that Morgan had sand in her shoes from playing in the field, and she was coming. She was just back over there dumping out her shoes first. They assured Colleen that Morgan had stopped by Colleen's car to complete the task and that she would be with them shortly. Colleen didn't wait. She wasn't settled. She headed towards the car, heart pounding, trying to reassure herself that she must not be able to see Morgan because she's sitting on the ground behind the car or something. You know, I wouldn't be telling you this story if that was the case. Colleen dropped to all fours, scanning under cars, but there was no Morgan. She raced around other parked cars. No Morgan. As she re-questioned the 2 friends, they said they had seen a man in a red pickup, and he'd been watching them play, and that as they were headed back towards the game, the man had even spoken to them briefly. And that's all the clues Colleen had. And that's all she would have for years and years. Now, they did all the things that happen following a disappearance. They called police immediately. The search for Morgan began right then and there. And there were plenty of people to track down. About 300 people were at the ballpark that night, and nearly all 300 were actually tracked down and interviewed. Search parties were organized. Small towns were marshaled. They were all looking for the 4-foot-tall, 55-pound girl in the green Ozark area Girl Scouts t-shirt and denim shorts. Now, one of the big problems facing investigators was that no one saw the guy in the red pickup take Morgan. The two friends gave a description, but that was it. Colleen knew, though. She knew her daughter had not run off. And the only option was that someone had taken her child. Back home, Colleen had yet to tell her other two children that their sister was gone. She and her husband had decided they would give it about 3 days. 3 days of searching, and if they hadn't found Morgan, then they would let the children know. On day 4, faced with the impossible, Colleen had a counselor come to their home, and together they told the siblings that their sister was gone. And little Logan, he just couldn't understand. He matter-of-factly looked at his mother and said, "Why did you lose her? Go find her." Well, for months, 4-year-old Logan would explain to his parents that the bad guys who took Morgan were doing mean stuff to her, like yelling at her all the time and not letting her visit Chuck E. Cheese. You guys, oh my goodness, looking at it through a 4-year-old's eyes. Well, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years, and all Colleen had was to take her desperation and turn it into something valuable. So she created the Morgan Nick Foundation, which was designed to help parents cope with the disappearance of a child. Okay, imagine the small, tight club of parents who are reluctantly shoved into this demographic. And being one of those parents whose child was taken, what a rough future. Well, as more years ticked by, Colleen helped establish the Amber Alert system in Arkansas, and the service was named after Morgan in the state. And then throughout the years, developments did surface. In 2002, police did conduct a dig on a private property in Boonville, Arkansas. This after they received a tip that was very specific. The tip was so specific that getting a warrant wasn't that tough. As they dug through the area with the help of a cadaver dog, nothing was discovered. Then in 2010, federal investigators searched a vacant house in Spiro, Oklahoma, specifically looking for DNA evidence that could link Morgan to the home. Well, that search seemed fruitless, but 7 years later, federal investigators returned to the same home. This time, they used cadaver dogs to search a well on the property. But again, no evidence was found. Finally, in November of 2021, police named a person of interest, Bill Jack Links. Unfortunately, Billy Jack Links was dead and had been for over a year. But police revealed that Billy had driven a red pickup truck back in 1995 and that he had been on the radar since the early days of the investigation. The FBI said they had conducted a search of that truck, and they believed they had found fibers that were consistent with that green t-shirt that Morgan was wearing on that warm spring evening. And then, quite unexpectedly, on October 1st of this year, police held a press conference announcing that they have DNA that links Morgan to Billy Jack Links. They informed the public that Billy had been questioned extensively back in 1995. And then, just weeks later, another little girl was almost kidnapped, and Billy was being investigated for that attempted snatching as well. Okay, here's how that one went down. It seems a mother and her young 4-year-old daughter were exiting a laundromat, and a man tried to pull the little girl into a red pickup. The mother was able to wrestle the child away from the abductor. Then, 1 year later, after Morgan was taken, Billy was charged and convicted of sexual solicitation of a child. Okay, so where did the DNA come from? Police say they tracked down the red truck, and in the vacuuming of the truck, they collected hairs. Those hairs were later tested and could be narrowed down to the same genetics as Morgan's family. And I know you're asking, this is a small town, did the Nicks have any connection to Billy? The answer is no. No member of the Nick family had ever been in Billy's truck. Now, Billy is the official suspect in Morgan's disappearance. Colleen said in a press conference following the announcement back on October 1st that an army of supporters, advocates, and heroes have rallied to uncover the truth about Morgan's disappearance. She stated it perfectly when she said, "Morgan's heart shines on." In that interview with the Blytheville Courier News, you know, the one that happened 5 years after Morgan disappeared, Well, Colleen told a heartbreaking story. She said in year 3, after the abduction, Colleen moved her family to Alma. Okay, that's the city of about 3,000 people that Morgan was taken from. Moving her family meant that Morgan's room was disturbed, boxed up and transported. Unsure of how to make that transition, Colleen set up a new room for her daughter in the new house. A few months later, the 2 younger children were attending Bible camp, and Colleen rethought the bedroom. She finally accepted that it was time to pack it up and allow her other 2 children to live again. She kept a few things out of boxes to remind the family of Morgan's personality, like the cleaned out peanut butter jar that had become a fish tank for Morgan's pet fish. She also allowed each of Morgan's siblings to keep 1 stuffed animal from Morgan's room. Now, during the press conference back on October 1st, Police Chief Jeff Pointer said that people needed to remember that Morgan was still missing at this point, but they could now focus their efforts on just 1 suspect. He committed that the investigation is not over. It is ongoing and active. Let's send our best vibes to Colleen that more information will become available and that Morgan's remains will be found. Now, per suggestion from more than one listener, I wanted to take this chance to talk about the missing and murdered indigenous women movement and highlight a case from this movement. First, let's get some facts. The National Crime Information Center reports that in 2016, there were 5,712 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls. All right, are you shocked by that number? We all should be. And like I mentioned at the end of an episode a couple of weeks back, the truly heartbreaking icing on this cake of horror is that they aren't reported on. It is so hard for me to find information. I covered a case out of Alaska last year where a woman went missing and her car was found near a convenience store. I couldn't find anything for you guys. It was nearly impossible for me to quickly use this platform to help get her story out there so that we could help in the discovery and the finding of this woman. Well, the MMIW movement has been started to give a voice to all those missing women. It also highlights the media's silence on these abductions and murders. The hashtag #NoMoreStolenSisters accompanies all their social media posts. Now, because of the recognition of this movement in November every year, I'm going to cover the case of Rosenda Strong out of the Yakima Nation in Washington. 31-year-old Rosenda was the mother of 4 children who was last seen leaving the Legends Casino in the Yakima Indian Reservation in Toppenish in September of 2018. Okay, she wasn't alone, but after the video surveillance footage of Rosenda was reviewed, the trail went cold. And as I mentioned, the police weren't helping much. Rosenda could go missing if she wanted to, and there was no sign of foul play, at least according to them. So there wasn't going to be much looking that was happening. Rosenda's sister Sissy decided it was up to her. She started visiting bars and flop houses where Rosenda would hang out. And everywhere she went, she was told they hadn't seen Rosenda for days. One thing was certain for Sissy in this search for Rosenda: Sissy could feel the evil. She knew she shouldn't visit these places alone, and she didn't because the sense of evil lingered throughout the establishments. She told People magazine that as she would leave the bars or a flop house, she would slowly feel the darkness kind of lighten up and then completely clear. Well, Sissy was getting some people to talk, but it was almost in code. Like they kept telling her to check in a freezer somewhere. And she would ask what that even meant. And the few who would talk with her said they didn't know where, but that the underground rumor mill was circulating that her sister Rosenda had been stuffed into a freezer. Left with no other option but to start searching the back areas for abandoned freezers, well, that's what Sissy did. She walked wooded areas. She searched forgotten properties, but she couldn't find a freezer. Or her sister, for that matter. Well, 9 months after Rosenda was last seen outside the casino, 2 homeless men found a discarded freezer on one of the reservation's dump sites. When they opened the door, they discovered Rosenda's bullet-ridden remains. For 4 years, Sissy fought for her sister's case to be analyzed, to be investigated, to be reviewed. Sissy was rightfully worried that her sister would become just one more case piled onto the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women. But in the spring of 2023, federal authorities arrested multiple men in connection with Rosenda's murder. Authorities believe that Rosenda had gotten into an argument with Jedediah Leisha Moreno. This happened outside one of the flop houses that Sissy had visited. They even believe that she was shot right there in front of the flop house. Well, with witnesses and everything watching, authorities then concluded that Jedediah's friends, Michael Moody, Andrew Zach, and Wilson Hunt, helped her move and conceal Rosenda's remains. It gets worse, though. One day after the shooting and of the concealing of Rosenda, authorities believe that Uriel Badillo kidnapped Jedediah Moreno from a home in Wapato. All right, are you following it here? Rosenda's dead because Jedediah, who's a female, murdered her with a gun. And then just one day later, Uriel Moreno captures and kills Jedediah. Okay, here's how that went down. It was believed that Jedediah was driven back to the flop house, maybe for some sort of reckoning, and then she was driven to another location where she was duct taped and forced into the trunk of a Chevrolet Impala. Once inside the trunk, investigators believe she was shot and killed. After that shooting, investigators believe that 2 juveniles dumped Jedediah's body. Days later, it seems another man got involved. Joshua Estrada found Jedediah's remains and transported her body to a different location to attempt to conceal the murder from the authorities. Okay, do you see what I see here? Murders are hard to get away with in the everyday world, but murders with this many people are even harder. Yet they are all distrusting of authorities, and they're all keeping their secrets, even from family members who are grieving and looking for their loved ones. And these 4 guys have gotten away with it for years. Well, when the indictment of the men was handed down, Sissy said she was devastated to learn that her sister's so-called friends were the ones who potentially murdered her and then hid the information for years. And this concept permeated Rosenda's case. One of the men accused of hiding her body, Andrew Zach, well, he was taken out of jail and moved to his mother's home with an ankle monitor because his life had been threatened in jail for ratting out more men in Rosenda's death. Okay, originally, 5 men were arrested. Following those arrests and the interrogation interviews, 2 more men were arrested, and that led to Andrew's life being threatened. Well, when it was decided that Andrew would be moved out of jail, Sissy spoke up to the judge, begging him to not grant this, quote, safety to Andrew. She said her sister didn't have the privilege of safety. Well, despite her pleas, the request was granted anyway, and Andrew was sent to his mother's home. In February of this year, Andrew also did what the other men wouldn't do. He pled guilty to the accessory after the fact in Rosenda's death. As part of his plea deal, he would continue to remain on house arrest for potentially 3 more years. So what about those other men? Well, almost all of them haven't taken a plea deal, and their trial has been delayed. That all happened in August of this year. The trial is now expected to take place in March of next year. All right, it seems that more time was required for the attorneys to prepare for the cases. And at this time, however, one of the other men did plead guilty. Kevin Brem, who was one of the men arrested after the first initial 5, well, he pled guilty to the same charge as Andrew. So both him and Andrew are expected to be sentenced to house arrest, but they will not face that sentencing until next year. And like I said, it's expected to be just a very short time of house arrest, maybe 2 to 3 years. Okay, I just have a question for you guys. Are you frustrated about this slow timeline yet? Because I am. One thing I've learned by researching this case, the lack of resources within the tribal communities might be leading to the situations like Rosenda's, situations where people are just covering for each other because they know they will not be protected if they come forward. Okay, near where I live, we have one specific Native American reservation with a few other reservations scattered throughout the region. During an interview with a woman from the tribe who now works with the state college in recruitment for Native American students in my area, she told me that most young girls on reservations accept that rape is expected sometime in their lives, and that those vicious and criminal experiences are mostly just covered up. Now, nativehope.org cites that murder is the third leading cause of death for Native American women. You guys, I don't have the answer. I do know that the more these instances are spoken of and the more this abuse is recognized, the better chance we have of increasing the help needed on these cases. I will absolutely watch what happens in March of 2025 to keep you guys updated on Rosenda's case. Well, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. You guys, thanks for joining me here on Rise in Crime. I love that you have been so supportive of the podcast, and thank you for allowing me to do a shorter, more condensed podcast when I am traveling. I really appreciate it. I love your 5-star reviews and your positive comments. Go ahead and leave them here on either Apple or Spotify, or if you're watching on YouTube. And you can like and follow on all of our social media accounts here at Oh No Media. That's Rise in Crime, Murder with My Husband, and Into the Dark. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.